G'day folks, talk to Damian Griffis, a proud Worimi man and the CEO of FPDN, First People's Disability Network. And I've had the privilege to work alongside this fella, and it's awesome to see and hear the origins, where it all kicked off, down in Sydney. And to see now 2 decades later, more, just seeing how him and the team are still chipping away out in the community, out in the halls of Parliament House, whether that's state or federal. Because a lot of these politicians and public servants need to hear what's happening in the community. So our points get across from a First Nations perspective, lived experience, intersectionality of disability in First Nations, Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander, Thursday Islander. A lot of mob out there. We should be heard. Advocacy's needed. Solid work. So if you like the podcast, hit that subscribe button. And we've also got a Patreon page. The link is within the description. So if you want to roll with the squad and become a patron, that'd be great. I want to thank our sponsors. Permanville Australia, the greatest electric wheelchairs in the land. Wouldn't be sitting in anything else but these 4 wheels right here, and they've got great assistive tech also. It's righto. Let's get into it. Mr. Damian Griffis, brother, thanks for rolling down from Newey over Castria now, but thanks for coming down here and jumping on the podcast and having a yarn with me, brother. Appreciate it.
It is so good to see you again in person, brother. It's been too long. I've seen you online a few times, but it's been a while. So good to see you again.
Mate, the crazy world of COVID and it's been a wild ride these last couple of years, and just what COVID has just the impact on society, and just when it's come to just people getting out and about again, and just how it's affected people, and mentally and physically, and and see it a lot especially when it's got to do with in and around the disability sector as well. Like, and you got people with certain disabilities where they've been locked in and homebound or whatever else, and just got those extra layers and intersectionality, and just trying to peel that back to get out and about and normalise things as best as we can, eh?
Yeah, I mean, and COVID's still around, as we know, and it doesn't really get the same attention that it was getting. So it's still out there and still impacting on mob with disability, no doubt about it. And yeah, during COVID, we spent quite a bit of time just taking food deliveries around and getting supplies to people. So yeah, it was a difficult time, but and it's still there though, eh? So
it is floating around. Right, where's your mob from?
Worimi, brother. So not far from here. So families up around Nabiac, Cranback. A lot of my cousins are still up there. So my father left the small farm though and moved down to Sydney. Everyone else stayed up there, and I was born and bred in Sydney, but Worimi on my dad's side, and my mother's side's got Wiradjuri connections as well, actually, which we're starting to learn a bit about as well. But not far away. So Newcastle's getting closer all the time. So Wabakal mob, and but across the harbour there's Worimi country as well. So good stuff.
Worimi and Wanneroo, pretty much neighbours there.
That's right. Absolutely.
That's good. And that's awesome that you're exploring that side of it too. So yeah. Because it's funny that you say that, because I've got Aboriginality on mum's side, but just with dad, like, he's starting to see like bits and pieces come up through there. I'm like, Jesus, So
yeah.
But that's the thing though. Like, since colonisation, a lot has been lost. Over time.
So true.
So grew up in Sydney. Did you grow up around the Leichhardt area, or where'd you grow up?
No, ended up in the inner west, but grew up in Normanhurst, so near Hornsby, on the sort of northern extremes of Sydney, and then moved to Cherrybrook, and Cherrybrook was very different when we first moved there. So in the west, in the northwest, and then like a lot of us out that way, as soon as we finished school, we took off and moved to the inner west. So yeah, I knocked around in there and Balmain and Leichhardt and Glebe and all those places for a long time, and then now in Newey and loving it up there.
Nice. So what led you, like as in from being a young fella growing up in Sydney and, you know, having your connections like culturally with your mob and other mobs, but leading into the world of advocacy. So where did that sprout from as a young fella that led you into the work that you're doing today, but also leading into some of the inspirations that you had down around Sydney and above and beyond that?
Yeah, so I grew up around a profoundly hearing impaired grandmother, and always saw how isolated her life was. So Nan really only had her immediate family, and we used to spend a lot of time with her, and she was isolated in her flat in Hornsby. And I think for me that sort of was confusing and created in me a sense of justice for her, like why does it have to be that way? And then in my early 20s, I was diagnosed with a generalised anxiety disorder, and I've got a few other labels since then, like a lot of us have. So, yeah, I went through some tough times there, panic disorder and OCD and stuff like that. But I was luckier than most because I was able to get good support. I was one of the first patients at the anxiety disorders clinic at St Vincent's Hospital in Sydney. It's got a completely different name now, I think, but that was sort of about 96, 97. So the weirdest thing was I remember the day they gave me a diagnosis. This will probably sound strange. It was actually one of the most relieving days of my life because I was like, oh, this is why I think the way I do, and I'm not losing it completely, if you like. So that experience has been really personally very grounding for me as well. And, I've always worked in disability. I did it since I left school. So what's that, 1989. So.
And they gave you a lot of tools, like how to cope with certain situations, like in and around anxiety?
Yeah, it's one of those things, and I'm sure you've yarned with plenty of people about this kind of stuff. But, yeah, it never goes away, but you learn how to manage it. So I've got a lot better at that. When I was in my mid-20s, I was really struggling. And now today it's always there, but I read the signals better and know when I need a good rest and, stay away from too many stimulants and stuff, and it's good for me. So
yeah, the old caffeine, geez. So some of the inspiration, so leading, like going through all that, family. So I'm sort of, when I'm thinking of, because I've known you for some time now, brother, and had a good solid relationship, and I'm grateful for some of the people that I've met through you and where I've gained inspiration as well, and and he's up there with the ancestors now. But when you're looking at old Unc there, Lester Bostock, so because that's when I first met you, like when you're talking about before FPDN, with some of the inspiration when I went down there to the office, and there's old Unc sitting in the office there, and yourself, and if you want to elaborate on your relationship with old Unc there. And
good on you. So we've known each other, I think we're just working it out now, probably 14 years or so, eh? Yeah. So, and haven't seen enough of each other lately, and it's beautiful that we're, sharing a room with you again, brother. It's beautiful because you're an extraordinary man.
Cheers,
so, Uncle Lester Bostock. So I was so fortunate to be mentored by him. I think he's probably the most humble human being I've ever met in my life. Achieved so many great things, yet he moved through the world with so much humility, and that was a great lesson for me. He had very significant disabilities, Jake, and he had a high amputation on one of his legs. But in his whole life, I never heard him ever get angry about that, and that kind of always amazed me. But then knowing his story, there was periods when he was younger, but he sort of moved through the world in a really humble, calm, but assertive way at the same time. I can't say enough about him, and I miss him all the time. He always feels like he's at my shoulder, I guess. I was very humbled to be able to eulogise him at his funeral, and some of the great moments I can remember is, we used to travel around a bit, and as you and I did too, brother, and one of the great thrills I always remember, it happened quite a few times, we'd be checking in back in the days when you used to check in at a counter on for your Qantas flights, and the staff would go, "Oh, is this your son travelling with you today?" And I'd be like, "Oh, that's so cool." That's so
take that on.
That's right. So an amazing man, and I miss him all the time. A mentor to a lot of us, brother, and
100%.
A very calming influence. And yet the other thing I remember saying in the eulogy, that one of the things that amazed me about him is he had so much to be rightfully angry about, yet he had moved beyond anger into another kind of way of being. And that's always been an inspiration to me. And he was there at all the critical moments in our modern political history, the 69 referendum. He was very prominent in that. Black Theatre in Redfern.
Yeah, that's right.
Setting up Aboriginal media. There's so many people that should be very thankful for Uncle Lester, and he wouldn't be he wouldn't want the attention of that, and I just find that beautiful. But miss him all the time, brothers. I'm sure you do.
100%. Yeah. So, and that's where I got bitten by a bit of the media bug there too, like knowing what he's paved, not for just Aboriginal people, First Nations, but when you've got First Nations with disability, and just show them what you can do, not what you can't do. This is your ability, and you utilise what you can. So, and, it's good now, like with the amount of tech that's out there that's really accessible, and, and I try and channel that path as best as I can,
You're doing amazing stuff. I do have to say, like, walking in here today and just seeing what has happened with Culture Connects and your podcast, and you should be very proud of yourself. And you're doing awesome.
Just having a crack, brother.
You're doing more than that, eh? You're leading. You're a leader.
Having a go. So are you. That's really important. Leading a lot of that. So the evolution of FPDN. So before it was hitting the ground running on a national front. So talk to us about the evolution, like coming up through New South Wales, and then where it, spread through to the other states and territories.
Yeah, so it's a longer journey than most people realise, as you know, brother. So the first gathering of First Nations people with disability was held way back in 1999 in Alice Springs, and that brought together mob with disability from around the country. And a report was written. This was back in the days of ATSIC. And the report said, people need to go back to their states and set up their own, state-based networks to give voice to mob with disability. So myself and Uncle Lester started that in the year 2000, and there was a gathering of mob with disability from across New South Wales at Gibbagunya, Darrell. And as you can imagine, that brought together people with a lot to say. And then over the next few years, we went around the state and met with mob with disability in person. We didn't meet with a service system. We wanted to meet with family and mob with disability themselves. And then we wrote a report called Telling It Like It Is, and that's still available. So that was about 2004, 2005. As you know, brother, that raised so many issues, and they're still there today. Anything from access to health services to no accessible housing, to no accessible footpaths in remote communities, to young Aboriginal kids with disability not being able to go to school, to serious concerns in mental health, issues with police and the way you interact with mob with disability. All those issues came up. And we weren't funded, really, for a long time, not in a big way. I was employed by People with Disability Australia, so always need to acknowledge that they were paying my salary. And Uncle Lester was volunteering, like he always did. like amazing, eh? And then, then we got some money from the Commonwealth government when the Rudd government came in. And this is starting to get to the time where you and I first met, eh? So
leading up to it.
Yeah. So, and that brought together leaders with disability mob with disability from around the country. And we met in Redfern a number of times and then built the first People's Disability Network from there. You and I go way back to 2010, I think. So you were there
2010,
in those early days, and you were bringing a really critical perspective of younger people as well. And that was a really important thing for us to focus on. So then we've sort of gone through a growth period. So we were just sort of one employee for a long time, then we're two, then we're three. Now we have about 40 employees around Australia, which is really awesome. It's taken, 24 years to get to where we are, but and we're doing more and more individual advocacy work, which I'm really excited about. I want us to do more of that.
Yep.
I think it's
that is important.
Yeah, it's probably a lot similar to all sorts of things that you still do, but it's kind of, we can do policy work and we can do representations to government, and you can go to Parliament House and feel flash and important, but the really important work is actually on the ground in community. So the individual advocacy work is where we really want to make a big difference. So doing a bit more education and training as well, just informing community about their rights, trying to get people to speak up for themselves a bit more. And but it's been a long journey. And I remember when we first met, you were immediately ambitious about doing what you do today. And there's not many of us around still working in this area, and I just want to acknowledge again like what you've achieved in the last few years, and you bringing that, I don't know, really let's get the NDIS working better, and I think what you're doing is so critical because there's so many issues there still,
100%, massive scheme in the billions. And, that's where a lot of that should be lent down to people at the coalface, see? So when it's going back to mob and, amplifying our voices, our concerns of how the scheme can be run better, or other state-based disability services too, or schemes, I should say. But before we get into a lot of that and unpack it, so talk to us about the core. Like, you're looking at the evolution, 40 employees, that's awesome, across the nation. Amplifying voices, and that's why it's good, like, here today, having this yarn. So, like, I love just having a chat, catching up. But if any of this can trickle out there and affect someone, that's huge. But when you're going back to the core focus and the mission statement of FPDN, lay it out.
So it's great timing, Jake, because we've just the board has just refreshed our vision statement, and it's pretty long in some ways, but really the critical parts are our opening statement. So our vision is we privilege the voices of First Nations people with disability. They are the authorities of FPDN, and that's the most critical takeaway from our vision statement. We also recognise that to do that, we need to always be improving, and we always need to recognise that disabilities, you only too well know, is an area that's evolving all the time, and we need to constantly learn how to give voice to mob with disability. So that vision statement is very clear. It's stronger than even we've had before, in the sense that no confusion about it. We privilege the voices of mob with disability. So that means we privilege it in the work that we do. We privilege it within the organisation itself. And that is who we are, who we will be, who we will always be. And that's because it's not only about that's what we need to do to be effective, but it's also about honouring Uncle Lester, Auntie Gail, who you know only too well. We lost both of them, 6-7 years ago now already. We have to honour their legacy, and
100%.
That's what it's about. So, that can present some challenges. We're also a workforce that's determined to be free of ego, and I think ego is dangerous. particularly male ego, to be honest. Ego can get in the way of, remembering that we're actually in service for other people. So we're always got to reflect on it and always do better. We always need to recognise that we need to be doing better all the time.
Yeah.
So
It's always good to internalise things, and you haven't, like, as time goes on, and all individuals, male, female, it's just having that checking in with yourself and making sure that you can run things at an even keel and not get too cart before the horse. That's with anybody out there, but
how do you? I've got a question for you. Here I go.
Yeah, throw it out there.
Ego is such a, I read about ego a lot, so
yep.
I'm always kind of fascinated by it and how it can take you off track, off goal and stuff. And you've always been, to me, one of the things that makes you a great leader is you're not ego driven either. You're Jake Briggs, and this is who I am, and I'm here for mob. And how do you keep it in check? Because it is hard. It's hard to do that sometimes because we can feel self-important sometimes.
Yeah, 100%. So but it's like I've always got my own little internal dialogue going. Where Jake's having a conversation with Jake, and where things don't, if things get to a certain degree of where I'm thinking of what's going on, whether I'm having an internal conversation within the moment, or I'm in a a silent place, but certain things are either good, bad, or ugly conversations internally in my head. I'm just it's continuously having self checks, because I'm no help to me if it's if ego is going to sort of roll out the window and get its own set of legs, or so I'm always sort of self-checking and saying, you always got to be with the people and be with the mob. Don't remove yourself from that. You're got to be at the battlefront, regardless that you're in a wheelchair in your situation. Like, you utilise what you can do physically, but where, upstairs, that's a tool chest. So you just try and, use your own arsenal as best as you can, because, it's just pointless if you're trying to smash a round plug through a square hole, So it's like, how do you risk mitigate? How do you balance? And not to forget about the ripple effect. Like, it's not just you and how you channel you. It's what you do that can, whether it's what you do, what you can see internally, or what you can't see, and how that ripple effect affects others. And it's to remember that, because, like I say, being with mob, because, mob was floating around in canoes, not bloody ships. So I sort of say, high tide raises all canoes, right? So if we can elevate and collectively get the paddles on, let's just all steam ahead and keep it rolling, eh?
Beautiful. Beautifully said. Couldn't agree more.
Yeah, 100%.
Beautifully said.
Same with yourself and what's going on. And it's good, like, because I do obviously predominantly service provision. I'm always an advocate first and foremost. And I know you're in advocacy, but I think a lot of what I've done and continue to do, like, it's iron sharpens iron. So when it's got to do with advocacy and service provision, because you want to elevate both. So, and I'm not removed from just thinking I'm at this stage. Like, knowledge is always floating around. So if it's conversations with yourself, other people in general, or what I'm reading on socials or media in general, I always want to soak that in and just try and internalise that so I can be better. So if I need to talk to my staff or whoever, or meeting with, just trying to have a yarn or pass on knowledge, I just want to, it's not just about building up me and Jake Briggs. If I can part that on to others, like going back to high tide raising all canoes. So, yeah. Just going back in, so mission focus, mission statement. So, like, because it's always tricky, like, and it doesn't matter if you're dealing with the NDIS, like if I'm working if it's individuals that are trying to get in a certain package and trying to elevate things, or if you're looking at like the advocacy world, and that's always a tricky one, So because if you're dealing with different states or federal funding, so what was it like just, trying to explain to, to the state or federal components like, we are FPDN and we're trying to fund this and trying to get them to understand what you're doing, like to elevate certain funding components or programs and how is it just dealing with the whole funding bloody component?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. The most frustrating part of the last 24 years or so is you're always repeating yourself. And that can sometimes be simply because the bureaucracy turns over and you got to start the message again. Ministers change, governments change. That's the most frustrating part of the job. And the other thing with what they call systemic advocacy, which is really a fancy way of sort of saying trying to change the system, that's all. You can't tell when that's going to happen, if that makes sense. So there are some things that we are advocating for that we may never see. And that's really hard to get your head around. Like you're kind of trying to think really long term in terms of legacy. So it can be very, very frustrating. And we also have a system that in big picture sense, so when I say system, like governments, state and territory and Commonwealth, really don't get disability still even today, not really. I think it's still the case that the Australian Public Service is one of the worst employers of people with disability in the OECD, the richest countries in the world. And I think that's still the case. So if you don't have colleagues with disability, if you don't have people within your own structures that are leaders, then how can you really understand what's needed? So changing the system is really hard and really slow, and so many people that have gone before us know that only too well. They've spent their whole life trying to do that. So that's really frustrating. We also have a system, and again, as you only know too well, brother, that is short-term focused, So every year, pretty much around...
Especially when you're gearing up and you're seeing governments change, whether it's state or federal, and it's like you said, you're still, yelling against that brick wall.
That's it. Yeah, like
the same message.
Yeah, you sort of go, I thought we were getting somewhere.
Can I get out of this echo chamber? Come on, we need progress.
That's it. So usually around February every year, I start to get very nervous because that's right. Okay, we've got to see how our funding goes for the next, what it's looking like. So we really need long-term funding cycles that go beyond the political cycle. There is this government at the moment is a reforming government, and I think there's opportunities at the moment, but the window feels, like we've got to act now. And when it comes to disability, it's getting more and more frustrating. I'm sure you've had this experience because we still need state and territories to play their role. Plenty of people with disability around Australia actually get most support from state, territory, agencies, particularly people that aren't accessing the NDIS, or even if you are, you still need to have, interactions with education or health or whatever, which is state run. So that's a constant frustration too, that 3 levels of government that we have in Australia. We're not about to change that, but that is a frustration because it's kind of a way for a bit of work avoidance sometimes, I think, on the part of systems and governments.
Yeah, and what I find frustrating there too is that nobody's really talking to each other when you're looking at interagencies. Like if you're getting, is Justice Health talking to Justice, is the NDIS talking to state-based, and they're going to have to now because, when Shorten and crew, when they were talking about where you got the National Disability Insurance Scheme, where that national, federal, but where they're going to start pushing that back onto the states. So it's going to be interesting. That's a whole nother conundrum. That's, it's, because it went from the states going to federal and then it's pushing back. So I don't know. I've got my own thoughts of how that's going to work, but but it's going to be interesting to see with Bruce Bonahady and crew, the architect of the NDIS, and see what they can formulate, if it's going to seed back into certain states and territories and premiers and prime ministers and government officials arguing over money and who goes where and pulling what from what, and but it's going to be interesting. So let's just give us a brief, because I love this story. Mungo Man.
Yeah. It's a great story. So a fairly recent discovery. So Lake Mungo, as we know, is a very significant historical or archaeological site. And there's been a fairly recent discovery of a single male footprint. Dated, I think it's 25,000 years ago. It's certainly, that's where it's sitting at the moment. It can the dating can change and make it even older. But a single male, and there's also a theory that there's a stick being used, and the archaeologists have determined that this one-legged male person with a stick is moving at speed as well, they believe. So probably participating in a hunt. So that's a brilliant story, because that shows that disability has always been an accepted part of the human experience, or part of the human, not even accepted, just part of the human experience in our communities. And more than that even, that there were modifications made or accommodations or to enable that community members with disability participate. That's profound, because if you compare that to what was going on, the history of disability in Europe is a bleak one, so you go from sort of stories like the Hunchback of Notre Dame, the sort of pitying, he's the person who lives in the tower and rings the bell and you hide him away, or the court jester, they often believe in the Middle Ages, the theory is now that was probably a person, probably say with intellectual disability, who was laughed at, and then you get the Industrial Revolution and people with disability are locked away and institutionalised because they're viewed to be, not economically productive.
Or bloody Hitler, when it wasn't just the Jews and the Gypsies, everybody, their own people, Germans, disability, can wheel them in the gas chamber too.
That's right.
They're useless.
Eugenics that's exactly right. The eugenics movement, where they started to create, how evil, they created a science around it to, make a scientific argument for why people, are different and stuff, like frightening, eh? So eugenics is also the same thing that resulted in, bones and of our ancestors being shipped to museums and in on the other side of the world. So, our worldview on disability is the right one, as we know, but it's always been about, people are different and come as you are. And I think it's that simple in some ways. And there's also some other amazing stories starting to come out. It's not uncommon for blind community members to be traditional healers. That's quite common. Or more evidence now to show there's been sign languages in existence. Yeah, you would have seen that one, brother, for a very long time. So not only, we would say we're thought leaders on inclusion, actually.
And that's how we should be recognised.
That's it, brother.
To the states, to the territories. Listen, people, there's plenty of mob out there that have got a lot of insight of how we can help develop First Nations and disability, whether it's got to do with the NDIS or other schemes. So they've got to take advantage of, mob here and just a lot of the thought leaders that can assist. So, and how do you generally see, like you see come as you are, so when it's got mob acknowledging mob within community with disability, and every, there's hundreds of different tribal nations across the continent, all these different language groups. So what's just been your experience and just, what you've known from the past, but also what you see now is like how people accept mob or how they deal with mob with disability in community?
Well, I think my cousin's work, Dr. Scott Avery, who you know well, brother, and has really shown how powerful this culture of inclusion is. He talks about Lake Mungo. He also did some research on discrimination that mob with disability experience, and what they all say is they don't feel discrimination within their own community. So that's brilliant. That's what we know. That's, come as you are, feel safe here. No one's treating you any differently. No one's going to label you. Unfortunately, what happens when you start engaging with external systems, so say the education department, I don't know, the police or health services, mainstream health services, then you start experiencing discrimination. So again, we have a natural foundation in inclusion. And I think that's what makes us such a powerful presence in the disability rights sector. But then we've got this sort of, I don't know if you say, it's almost like a perverse problem, because then like to get access to the NDIS, you have to go and get a label though. So it's a constant tension, and it's a weird thing in many ways. But if we keep telling our story that we know what inclusion is naturally, because we do, then not only do I think we've got a great gift to give to Australia, but we've also got the leadership of that. And I really believe Scotty's work is amazing. Cousin of mine and cousin of yours too, brother, I'm sure in the end. So
culture is inclusion, solid work.
Yeah, so
good resource.
That sort of stuff is really helpful and really important too. So having an academic making those arguments as well.
100%. So, you've been in the sector for a long time, so, and just seeing the fluctuations of, the hills and the valleys of whether it's state or federal. So when you're looking at since the inception of the National Disability Insurance Scheme, the NDIS, so what's your general take on it, like where it's at now, and how can it help mob in the future? Yeah,
I mean, it'd be really interesting to get your thoughts as well, Jake. But I think it's in an improving place would be the way I would describe it. So the last 12 months to 18 months have felt different in the sense that the leadership within the NDIA is recognising that it needs to do better for mob with disability. I think that's a really important starting point to acknowledge that. There's just been the appointment of a Deputy CEO, First Nations, Janine Mohammed, who I caught up with this morning. That's a really positive development. We're just going to reset the First Nations Advisory Council, which you'll get invited to, brother, so of course. I think they're positive signs. But it's kind of proof in the pudding now, if you know what I mean. And one of the things that the scheme, it needs to look different for mob. That's the reality. And the scheme is going to have to adjust to that change. I'm certainly aware of and you would have clients too that have had a positive experience. I want to acknowledge that, definitely. There are mob out there that are having a positive experience. However, what I would say, it's usually because they've got someone going to bat for them and someone who knows how to get the most out of the system.
And not everybody has that.
That's it, eh? Most of our mob don't, particularly in regional remote. But even the barriers like getting a diagnosis or, they're unreal. So the way I would say improving, but cautiously really hopeful, definitely a different environment to what it's been in the past with the agency's leadership, who were just, couldn't engage with them. Different now. Also, there's a dedicated minister who's definitely personally invested. That's really significant.
And it's good because he's got a background in health too, So
yeah, that's right. So there's good signs. But now it's about cracking on and getting on with the work. We don't need to have any more conversations about barriers and stuff. They've been done to death. Now it's about what do we do to make change. Yeah. How are you feeling about it, brother?
Oh, there's so much that needs to be done on just say within that topic, that's a whole bloody 3-hour podcast on its own, So, but where it is having those thought leaders, like where you got the First Nations advisory panels, and because you got to make change and have formalised strategic ways that are logical, but logical in a sense where it helps mob and affects mob in a positive way. But it's like having those voices from different sections of the nation where that adds to the bandwidth, to cultural bandwidth. So, where you're having the conversations first. And, I know what you're saying, like where we've been saying it, but it's keep going up against that brick wall, and hopefully you have other perspectives too, First Nations, that can add to those internal groups that then can make change, that go over to the board and you've got some good eggs on there, you know, that can soak in that information. But hopefully, you know, that the conversation goes through to these individuals. So, because, you know, not everybody's Aboriginal, they don't get it. So it's us trying to make it digestible in a way that makes sense, that can then trickle down and affect the scheme. So certain components are legislated to give us more bandwidth to get out there to, if it's, and, you know, I know it's the scheme and like where it's got to do with service provision, but going back to where I said iron sharpens iron when it's got to do with the advocacy. So, but how can we give more force and when it's got to have more boots on the ground or wheels when it's got to do with our mob? We know our mob works. So where you've got individuals that, and going back to what you said that about that again, where we need more people working within, if it's within government, whatever that looks like, if it's some sort of subcontractor grant, like there's all these different looks, but as long as you got us at the coalface getting out to the community, because you still got plenty of mob out there that don't even know what the NDIS is or how do they access it, or something might not be right. I look different, I feel different, and where the diagnosis has to come into play. The amount of people that come in here, like into our office, and when they're not on the scheme, and people are floating underneath the radar, and I'm like, well, hey, if you don't have the 3 to 5K to do an OT, FCA, functional capacity assessment, then, you know, it makes it hard, because the public system, you can be waiting up to 12 months, 18 months. So you got these people like in limbo, and it gets really hard when it comes, especially when kids.
Because your disability can change in that period, of course,
100%.
Yeah, big time.
And like, you know, so there needs to be different ways of how we help these individuals, because if you've got kids that are going through school and you've got the education system that doesn't understand, and docs are getting involved, and because we get involved in this stuff all the time, so then we're trying to explain X, Y, and Z, and, you know, because you don't want stolen generation 2.0 like continuously rolling through, which sucks. And you said, because they don't understand FASD, they don't understand ASD and the intersectionality. And you got some schools, like you got a lot of schools out there that do understand, but then you got some that don't, and they're working in these disability departments within education, and they don't get it. They don't get disability, they don't get Aboriginality, they don't get the intersectionality of both. You know, and it's like, yeah, well, let's just, it's not working. It's going back to that bad, you know, the
black kid syndrome.
throw them to the back of the class. They don't get that voice. They feel shamed out. That just exacerbates. Yeah, well, then DCJ comes, swoops in, takes them out. Let's throw them in the, you know, a foster home, and then I don't need to go into the dark realities of what happens there, you know. So
true. I mean, it's been in the media this week, the latest data, I think now 50% of kids in out-of-home care are Aboriginal, so it just keeps going up and up and up. System's clearly failing. Disability is a big part of that story, I think, that's still untold, Like, we've still got to recognise that a number of Aboriginal kids are being removed, have disability, and that's a failing of the system. It's not the failing of their parents, it's the failing of society in a lot of ways to support one another.
100%.
Look out for one another,
That's it. And when you're going through education, then what happens? Then when you got, you know, when they're 9, 10, double digits, 15, like they're getting these frustrations, and they're out on the streets mucking up, and it's a part of their disability, I should say. You know, it is mucking up, but that's how it looks like to, you know, when you're looking at the police or whoever it may be, and they're just getting picked up, thrown in the juvie. Juvenile justice don't get how mob work. Like, you do get a lot. Look, and I'm not saying it's all bad. You got a lot of good eggs that do understand the system and trying to help individuals. But where you're getting like a lot of people falling through the cracks, because that's where I'm saying education, that's failing, and like people don't understand, then that's the next step. Then it's juvenile justice, and then it leads up to the big house, and then, you know, and where things could have been solved years ago. Where you could have had things in place so they don't end up in juvenile justice and leading up to adults, and then where things just exacerbate and recidivism, and you're trying to break the cycle. And
It's not the fault of the child, it's the fault of the system.
Broken, brother. Got to
so
fix
true.
it.
Yeah.
Let's put more people in the community, but also having a, sitting at the table, making sure that we've got a solid presence, no matter when governments are flipping hands, so we keep that continuous voice through and make sure that that's heard, not having to reiterate stuff again, playing chess, we're already knocked over taken hold of the king and knocked that over. We've played that game one too many times, you know.
Well said. Agree with you
Sick of
completely.
being the bloody pawns. But
Well said.
So, and that's where I've always been really interested in seeing the mechanics of that too, where, FPDN and other mobs where you've had a pretty good sort of outlook on, this is how we deal with First Nations people and our mob, but we need to be heard on an international level. We need to go to NY, New York, Geneva, United Nations. So how do the international community see us? Do they take it seriously? And I know it's a lot of soft law and stuff like that when it comes to, the international stuff, United Nations resolutions, stuff like that, right? So how do they take us on? But also let's look at some of the similarities as well when you're looking at the Inuits, when you Canadian Aboriginals, when you're looking at the Indians of America. So how do they take us on, and is there similarities? And then we'll elaborate on that.
Yeah, I mean, great question, Jake. And as you know, with UN activities which you've been involved with, you're right to say it's soft law. There's no doubt about it. But it's also an opportunity to shine a light on what's going on at home. And you find, as you know, when you're at the UN in New York and Geneva, you do get people from other countries who actually know, sometimes it's quite surprising, about the injustice that First Nations Australians face, including First Nations people with disability here. So that in a way is kind of motivating in a way, if you get my drift. It's sort of like, okay, they want to expose the things that are going on. I mean, we should never kid ourselves, and Australia has to be judged by the highest possible human rights standards. One of the wealthiest countries on earth, and yet the discrimination that mob with disability face is a national shame on many levels. As you know, we still have community members. Well, it's not an exaggeration to say that they're starving or don't have access to the basic fundamentals of life, being access to shelter and access to food and access to clean water. I think most Australians don't know this stuff or are blissfully ignorant of it, that we have communities that where many of our people are suffering extraordinarily. And to share those stories at the United Nations is really important, because then at a government level, other countries can hopefully start putting pressure on Australia to do better. Your other question about, there's no doubt there's incredible common ground between Indigenous people from around the world. We have strong connections with Maori mob with disability. They've got the same issues as we do. Probably a very strong, robust cultural response though, which is a good learning for us.
They've got some solid foundations over across the ditch here, eh?
Don't they? And I think there's. I always find when I get an opportunity to get over there, I've been over there a few times, as you have, I'm sure. Is their cultural strength is so evident, and it's uncompromising. It's really inspiring. Yeah, you're right about Canadian, First Nations people, North Americans, same sort of issues, child removal.
Terrible.
Same post-colonial experience in many ways. There's commonality between Indigenous people around the world, as you know. Are you going to be in New York in June, brother, or you don't know about it yet? Or
might have to get me wings on.
Yeah, June, July or something. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe not this year, but maybe, we'll have a talk off camera and maybe next year we can formulate something,
Do a big, I could see you just tearing it up there as you have in the past.
Oh, mate, I always like, putting things on blast that should be done, because if it's going to make effect, and no matter if it's how small or large a change is, if you can say something that's going to take effect, that's a good thing, and especially if we're heard at that international level, because then it's like people back home, they're like, oh, shit, they're saying this on the, they're putting us on blast here in New York. There's a population of 330 million over in the States. Like, are we going to start getting bombarded? And because everybody's got a voice these days, social media, like governments and individuals and people feel the pressure of that, and that's the good thing. So, it's the voice of many, and that does make change. But you just got to keep bloody chipping away. But, and the NDIS is still, it's got its kinks. And I know I do feel fortunate that we do have this here, and like we are doing better than a lot of countries. But still, regardless, like we're going to make sure that we try and get this as locked in as much as we can, because then if we can be an example for others, that's what you want, not, exactly. We've got what we're doing here for our mob, but, for the mob across the ditch, like up north and southern hemisphere. So a lot of mobs. So overrepresentation, a lot of mob locked up. Let's go into some of your frustrations in and around the justice system, whether it's New South Wales, WA, just all over,
Yeah. Firstly, I want to acknowledge the amazing work you're doing here, Jake. And, I think this is Australia's greatest national shame, and its most secret shame, that there are many First Nations people with disability in Australia in prisons across the country who shouldn't be there. We still have indefinite detention provisions in some jurisdictions where First Nations people with disability can be indefinitely detained in prison. I mean, we have to stop and think about that for a moment. It's one of these things you go, hang on a minute, does that actually happen in Australia? Yeah, you better believe it. That you can be effectively accommodated in prison because there's no other alternative support structure is extraordinary to think about. So, and it's not uncommon to hear of situations where First Nations people with disability, if they'd pled guilty to a particular crime, whether they did it or not, they could have been on a completely different trajectory to being indefinitely incarcerated is disturbing. It's also a real, you touched on it before, brother, this transition, I suppose you'd almost call it, from juvenile detention into adult prison. And I couldn't agree more. The lack of early life focus to provide support to a young Aboriginal child with disability could have avoided all of that problem. We've got the incarceration system, the prison system in Australia is inherently racist and ableist. Simple as that. And I often wondered, were we going down the American path? Well, we've gone down that path and past it.
Privatisation.
We've gone past it, eh?
Let's throw them in. That's a extra $600K for that individual. That one individual in a cell that's shared by two in a space that's a quarter of bloody this size of this room here. It makes me sick,
So it doesn't even make sense from a cost sense, eh? Like it's sort of, so then you can only draw the conclusion that, yeah, this is fundamentally a racist and ableist system where First Nations people are seriously overrepresented. No, we've gone past the American system of, the American system is predominantly African American prisoners. Well, the Australian system is not far off being, it's predominantly Aboriginal prisoners, and I would imagine increasing numbers of Pacific Islanders as well, probably for that matter. But so what's the purpose here? You kind of, it's not hard to make conclusions that get you to the point where you go, well, this is a racist enabler structure that is harming many thousands of First Nations people and is actively doing so. So,
and the facilities too, like, you know, in the NT you only got 2 prisons. Like, they end up setting like up in the States like FEMA camps, you know, because the population is just over flooding. Like in New South Wales, there's 20 something adult prisons, like heaps, compared to the NT. So I know the population's greater, but the facilities are just dire, you know, and it's a lot of culture components aren't filtered through in the right way, and that's where we can make a stamp, you know. When
you've been doing amazing work in this, brother, for a good while now.
You just got to
how do
keep
you
fighting.
feel about it all? What's like?
It's just it's hard, but it's going back to like where you're looking at different governments, but where you're talking about it's just continuous change coming back and forth. So, and it's hard because you got a mix of what's public and what's private, and you know what does get funded, what doesn't, you know, because they're getting, and it all trickles down from the premiers to that minister, and then obviously who's talking to the different jails and what can and can't be done, and we just need to just keep the foot on the throttle and try and make change. But how do we educate people when we're trying to reverse, like, you know, stigma, stereotypes? Like, you know, we just need to keep hammering down. How do we go about keep educating people?
What a great question, because that's one of the big challenges is, you know, only too well, brother, is the media is so often, hysterical around crime and punishment, and politicians make a lot of mileage of being tough on crime. In fact, plenty of politicians make a career out of it that keeps them in power. That's a massive ship to turn around. And it's hard to present stories in a balanced way, you know, that tries to get people to understand. People get to certain places in their life because the system has failed them, not because they're, I don't know, inherently bad or something. I think that's the big battle. The bigger picture battle is, you know, you look at, say, what's going on in Alice Springs at the moment with a curfew. Yeah, we've got to get to the bottom of what's really going on there. I'm not from there, so people there are much better informed than I am. But curfew's like a Band-Aid, eh? And these sort of these Band-Aid approaches, which is just the way things are done, they don't work. So what do they say? What's the definition of stupidity? Keep doing the same thing over and over again, or something, expecting a different result or something. It's kind of, I think that's the thing I find the hardest is you're up against a system that, you know, sort of divides the world into really unsophisticated ways, bad people, good people. So there's a context here around stigma. There's also that a reality that disability is still portrayed completely inappropriately in media, you know, and that the way people with psychosocial disability are described, or the way people with intellectual disability are described, or, you know, it's not showing much sophistication as a society, you know. So, yeah, it's I don't know, it's hard, isn't it? It's really hard.
I'm glad that, and this has only been recent, but now that when you're talking about inclusivity, that the ABC's starting to open up a bit more. So when you got Shout Out to Naz Campanella and crew, where they're given those identified roles and they're starting to expand on it, but that's starting. So
definitely a positive. Definitely, Naz is amazing, and you can see the change she's creating within that great big institution. Definitely, that's a positive thing. Definitely, we need.
But that's a start. That's only just now. It's
just a start, isn't it? Yeah, exactly.
So and it's having a mix of both, where you got where you've got the cultural side, but also when it comes to the disability side as well. But and then that's going back to Alice Springs, like, yeah, what has been going on? It's not like this is just you've had all 120 kids just rock up into the town and just start going berserk. Like this has been trickling through over time. So, and it's and a lot of people don't get it. Like I've been up there, have been fortunate to be up around communities up that way, and like where you got the cultural indifferences, and and you've got a lot of elders and mob trying to balance things out there, and when it's trying to get local area command or or the territory government to understand them, who they are as people foremost, then disability and everything else that comes in between. So it's a tricky one, but they need to really hammer down on that so they can just keep people safe. Not just safe, understood.
Yeah, well said.
Bloody hell. So FPDN, you got some teams working on a lot of this when it's justice and a lot of stuff going on, yeah?
Yeah, we do have a dedicated policy person focused on justice, so that's a positive thing. Getting more of a disability perspective into some of the bigger justice campaigns, is really important. Big job, big ship to turn around though, and but yeah, we speak up as much as we can on those things.
So do you reckon like federally and state, because, when it's advocacy and you're tapping into resources of state and federal, like are they taking you guys seriously and like, are you going down to the different parliaments and knocking on the door and this is a message, this is what's going on. And it's not just saying what you're doing, it's like how we can help each other.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah?
I think the work that you're doing here on the ground is what could inform what messages we need to take to power. We need to speak truth to power. And to do that, you need the evidence, and you have the evidence here all the time. So, we need to do that more often and share those messages. The thing, I don't know. I'm naturally an optimistic person. I've been flawed, like a lot of us, through and probably traumatized.
Perfect,
no, but through the voice process was very traumatizing, and we were very involved in it. I probably knew in my heart of hearts it was never going to happen.
Yeah, me too. But it was
but
good.
You've got to have a go.
100%.
Yeah, but it's devastating at the same time that 40% of Australians like you, 60% don't.
It made me
maybe
sort
at one level, maybe it's better than I thought it was at one level. But that's hard though, to put yourself out there. As I'm talking about, as a whole people.
Yeah, exposing yourself
and being rejected. Yeah, it hurts your optimistic worldview. Put it that way.
There's so much false media out there, like disinformation. Like it being like when I had family members, they'd be at the local coffee shop, and where you had some random person where they just had all these pamphlets where it just was not true.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, and
you have to start paying for beaches and stuff, is what I heard.
We're just going to wheel up and say, well, this is my country.
You've
probably been living here, you've owned the house for 10 years, but we're going to have to evict you, we're taking over. Black fellas are taking over.
Bizarre, eh? Like, honestly, it's amazing to me in Australia how so many Australians are fearful of a very small minority of Australia. It's kind of weird, isn't it? Like it's kind of, oh my God, we've got a long way to go.
I know, but it was just pushing for, like, if you want people to voice up what's best for your case, like if you've got, if it's got to do with education, and if you got someone that's from that field, that is an expertise, you're going to channel that, yeah?
Mm-hmm. Should be logical, shouldn't it? Yeah.
Pretty much. So that's where you float that into the Indigenous First Nations space, and where you're getting the people that are best of class, and where they do get culturally acknowledged from their people, because you want to make sure that's channeled through. You got the confidence of the people, goes back and forth. You channel that to the powers above, and hopefully you make change. Makes sense, yeah?
Yeah, it's logical, brother.
God, it gives me the shits.
Yeah.
And and it felt weird, like just when that didn't go through, and just when I'm wheeling back out on the streets, and I'm like, and just that, it was a dark feeling. And going back to how do people see us? And you're feeling that blanket of
Do you do that thing now where you kind of, particularly when you're wearing, say, stuff that obviously identifies you, do you do that thing now where you sort of go, I wonder if they like me or not? I wonder if they voted yes. I find myself doing that a lot. So I'm sort of, going down and I go past people and I wonder if they were a yes voter or are they a no voter? It's kind of...
I've had that, but then I'm like...
It's weird.
Don't give a shit. If you like me, you like me. If you don't, you
nice.
don't. On me.
I need to do that. I need to get better at that.
So, it's playing fair and just keeping things level. But if you don't, on me, I think I'm an all right person. I try and do the right thing and have a go on it, crack, and and just try and be methodical, try and be logical, and as you get older, you try and think you're wiser. Probably still think or do silly things, and we're human and we're not perfect, but. And you're doing solid work, and it's, where we're just trying to have a go, trying to not just make ourselves better, but we want society to be better. We want to live in a good, culturally safe place.
Absolutely.
Where everybody gets each other. We're in a melting pot here in Australia, and you got one of the oldest cultures on the world. Lean on that.
Tenacity.
Lean on it.
It's a massive
That's
asset.
it. Put it in your back pocket.
Yeah.
Throw the curveball when you can, because there's plenty of them, whether it's got to do with disability and other sectors of First Nations topics. But, just need to keep on hammering. So the Royal Commission into the violence, abuse, neglect, exploitation of people with disability, and you yourself and FPDN were involved in that. I was involved in that, and just having a yarn up in regards to First Nations. So what was your experience of that in around the commission itself and the commissioners, what was going in Australia, hearing some of the voices and how you felt about it? But now that we're past that and we've got the recommendations, does it have teeth, and what are you seeing?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Jake. So I think the thing that is positive, that there's the standalone chapter of recommendations for First Nations people with disability. I think that's positive. And there are a couple of headline issues that I think are also positive. The establishment of a First Nations Disability Forum, absolutely. Also this idea of, which I'm not sure that it was described in detail, but this idea of a First Nations Disability Investment Fund. I want to understand what that means, but there are two positive things that came out of it. I guess the worry is now, is this going to go the way of other royal commissions? So there's 222 recommendations. I think in some ways that overwhelms government. What do we do? And that could be, it could end up being in a bit of a slowdown in terms of responses. I worry about that. Having said that, if we can get the First Nations Disability Forum up and this First Nations Disability Investment Fund, whatever that is, we need to consult with government and people like yourself as well about, government needs to consult with us, I should say, and people like yourself about what that looks like. I've got some hope if those things were implemented. But at the same time, it does risk going the way of any number of royal commissions that there's a whole lot of investigation, a whole lot of recommendations, and then you find 10 years later there's not much progress made. That sounds terribly cynical the way I'm saying that, but it is based on experience. You still hear reports coming out of Dondale, for example, and there was a royal commission to that.
Dylan Voller.
And you've still got, we've still got Aboriginal deaths in custody recommendations that have never been implemented. We've got Dondale, it's still in the news, often. There's other royal commissions. Do they actually lead to the reform that we hope for? Well, no, sadly. So, but I think the challenge now is for us as advocates to keep it on the agenda and keep government accountable, and that might help to make sure it has a life, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think you should have different looks, like, because you talk about 222 recommendations can be really overwhelming. There's a lot of different channels there. So how do you compartmentalise that where you can funnel it to, the tip of the spear and know what's going to get over the line?
Yep.
If you're looking at that investment fund, so out of that, how do you drag the best? Well, I shouldn't just say the best, where that's sections that are really important that are going to get over the line.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, we've got 222, but out of that, this is the 10 or this is the X, Y, and Z that's going to get over the line. We need to get this going first.
Mm-hmm.
Let's, if it's having a business case, whatever that looks like, of how you can have funds, but how do you have those funds that are going to best benefit the recommendations to first trickle that over?
Exactly.
Because then you can, that's worked for 2 years. This is great. It is making effective change. Now, let's bring in the rest of the recommendations and channel the next stage. So if it is stage driven, I don't know.
I agree.
I'm just throwing that out there.
No, I think that's exactly right. And when you say the tip of the spear, that is, it's almost like First Nations Disability Forum fund that, and then that does the work of the relevant recommendations. No, I agree.
Yeah.
That's start with that, the tip of the spear, and I agree.
Yeah.
That's the only way you could try and address 222 recommendations. And some of them, a fair number of them, in fact, I think more than half are state and territory responsibilities. So it's not a Commonwealth thing. It's everybody's responsibility. So
yeah, that's it. I'm all about, if it's data and frequency and collating that, because then if you've got all that and can substantiate it, it's like, and they can't refute it, as in the government, because you've got this is what's going on. This is reality, not just angry blackfellas just carrying on. This is it. Paper here, knock, knock, fund up.
Well said.
Please.
Yep.
Or should I really say please? But anyway.
Nice.
Mate, so, brother, the future of FPDN. And the future of FPDN, but just currently with its resources and what's going on.
Yeah, so I think the most critical part of our future is becoming an accredited National Disability Advocacy Program individual advocacy provider. So we're on that journey, and confident we'll realise that. Then we can start providing individual advocacy supports around the country in a bigger way than what we're doing now. We do as best we can, but I think that's a massive part of our future, because I want to see us being available to community to try and help out as much as we can. Policy work will always be there, and I think we always need to do that. But the real change comes on the ground. So that's probably priority number one in so many ways. The other thing is growing our training education side of our work. So where we educate mob about their disability rights, it's still a huge weakness, as you know.
Yeah.
People just don't know.
100%.
If you don't know what you don't know, sort of thing. I think that's a big part of our future as well. Being involved in reform of the NDIS, definitely. Leading the way there and making sure that people like yourself, who've got the inside information and the brilliant ideas on how it can work, are actually the ones being heard. I think that's really important. Yeah, definitely keep putting pressure on government and systems to meet the recommendations of the Royal Commission, definitely. But I'm really keen for us to grow our individual advocacy side of our organisation, so people can rely on FPDN to help them out navigating. Disability systems are some of the most complicated systems there are out there.
100%.
So, having people on our workforce available to help mob out in community and with those sort of things, I think would be really great.
Well said. Anything else that you want to throw out in the atmosphere, brother?
Oh, just it's been too long, and it's so good to see you. And again,
100%.
like I said at the beginning, you should be so proud of yourself. And I know the board of FPDN and all of us that have known you a long time are very proud of you, brother. And you should be very proud of yourself. I know you're a humble man, and you won't probably necessarily acknowledge that, but you should, And I'm just so thrilled to be here and come in and have a yarn with you and see what you're up to and doing the great stuff. And it's good.
It is good. I'm glad you're here. And that's us having this talk, and I think that's where together, it's like iron sharpens iron. If you're looking at things down the line that may take place and just conversations that will and need to be had. So, and you fellas have always done solid work, and you need strong advocacy. Governments sometimes get a bit, do we really want to fund these people that are going to end up jumping back up and carrying on? But it's much, much, much more than that, because it's, like you said, going back to the coalface on the ground, because then you're seeing the people throughout the country, giving them voices, collating that, what needs to be said. And that all that does is go back to the government, and where it enhances the NDIS, it enhances schemes in particular ways of how to do it better, because you're getting that. Like, where does it, like when you're looking at, it all comes down to the end user, yeah? So it's just
So true.
getting all that, But, you're doing solid work, and I know you're a modest fellow there too, but, what FPDN have done, and not just being heard around different states and territories and community, but if you're looking also back, it's important that around the world, here's what's going on to us 3%ers down here, yeah?
So true.
So important. So how can people get in contact with yourself, FPDN?
Yeah. So always the usual ways through our website is definitely one way. Inquiries at fpdn.org.au. Our phone number is 02 9267 4195. We've also got a free call number available now for people to contacted us. I'll send that. I don't have it on me to only just open that number, but also through our social media as well. We're available any time of the day or night to have a yarn with you. If you need help with anything, whatever it is, could be anything, I don't know, getting access to the DSP to, I need accessible housing, any issue at all, then get in contact with us and we'll do the best we can to help you out. But yeah, thanks for the opportunity and great to see you again, brother. Good on you.
Awesome, brother. Appreciate you coming down for a yarn on the podcast, and mate, we'll be jumping on again soon for a yarn, that's for sure.
Good on you, brother. Cheers.
Righto. Solid yarn there with Brother Griffis. Haven't seen the fella for a while, so it was good. Good chat, good yarn. Enjoyed it. And good seeing the direction of FPDN. And we need mob, like with Damian and his crew, and a whole lot of other orgs and entities, First Nations, to be continuously funded regardless of government. Because governments come and go, but there's people like myself and others out there with disability. We're still here. We're not going nowhere. So we keep needing to yarn up, people. Need to keep fighting. Loved it. So if you liked the podcast, hit that subscribe or follow button. And we've also got a Patreon page. The link is within the description. So if you want to roll with the squad and become a patron, that'd be great. And if you want to get in contact with me, you can get me via Instagram at streetrollandcheetah or email, one word, streetrollandcheetah@gmail.com. And we've also got a Facebook page, Keep Rolling with Jake Briggs, so check it out. I'm also on LinkedIn, Jake Briggs. And want to thank our sponsors, Permobil Australia, the greatest electric wheelchairs in the land. Wouldn't be sitting in anything else but these four wheels right here, and they've got great assistive tech also. So righto, see you on the next one.